feeling, and I wasn't anymore.
Just so you know, the back left, the big hoagie in the back left corner is vegetarian.
Cool.
The one on the right has meat on it, if you're hungry.
Testing, testing. This is Logan testing.
Yeah, everybody's body is different. Yeah, I mean, when I go backpacking and stuff over at Tanner's, just like the old classic.
wall or something.
Just
Are you
so
serious?
cold.
You need an app to tell you what to do for your body. For something as basic as drinking water.
I can just go like a long time without water.
I can too.
So I just like, I don't need it to feel
Yeah.
like a
Functional. Yeah. No, I argue that I'm just training for the apocalypse when, you know, drinkable water is going to be hard to find. So
Probably sooner than we think.
When is this gonna happen? Is it on your calendar? Is it in your calendar?
This is Richie Cawley, is a professor of theater and also the artistic director for the Lyric Repertory Company. And I'll let you give the name of your talk and whatnot. Anyhow, I've got the standard sign-in sheet, but I know all your names, so I'm not even going to pass it around. Just write it down for you. And yeah, take it away. All right. Cool.
I gotta turn this thing on. Huh? There we go. I see a green light. Right, like Thad said, my name is Richie Call, and I teach over in the Department of Theater Arts. I teach specifically in the BFA acting program. And when I was first asked to do this, at first I thought, why in the world am I being asked to participate in a communicating science series? I was very intimidated by that. In fact, I literally thought, this is not a joke, I literally thought, as long as Rob Davies doesn't show up, I think and I saw Rebecca on my way over here, and I thought again, for some reason, he will make me really nervous, and so thank you for coming. But Thad assured me that I could focus on the communication part of this and leave the connection to science up to you. And I will talk about acting and how we as actors focus on communication really in two ways simultaneously. Because at any point on stage, we are communicating with two different audiences. One, the people that we are speaking with on stage, the other characters in a scene. And two, the audience out in the house, either as direct address, or if we're not directly addressing them, we still are always conscious of the fact that everything we're saying and doing is communicating something to them. And we need to theatricalize that communication in order for them to get it. It's not enough for us just to know what we're saying. We have to know how we're communicating it to them. And so there's some specific ways that we do that. Immediately, one of the things that I thought of was an issue that we face with all of our youngest actors immediately. It's almost in every single actor right at the beginning of their training. And this is something called a down ending or a down glide or dropping off at the ends of your speeches. We saw a great example of that in the State of the Union last night, right? Now, down glides, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, I'll give you an exaggerated example of what that might sound like, right? Show me the Scotsman who doesn't love. Show me the Englishman who doesn't. Show me the true-blooded Aggie who doesn't love the spot where the... Right? That's not very effective communication, right? And like I said, that is an exaggerated example of what a down glide might sound like. But you understand what I'm saying. Not driving through in energy to the end of your thought, your sentence, or your line. Now, you might hear that example and think that the antidote to down gliding is an up glide. In fact, most actors initially do because they're so hungry to just find the cure for all of their problems, right? That they say, okay, well, if my problem is I'm down gliding, then obviously what I need to do is up glide, right? So that might sound something like this. Show me the Scotsman who doesn't love the thistle. Show me the Englishman who doesn't love the rose. Show me the true-blooded Aggie from Utah who doesn't love the spot where the sagebrush grows, right? Now, as you can tell, that is easier to understand, or it's easier to hear, but it's not necessarily a more effective way to communicate, right? So what we have to convince the actors of is that's not the actual antidote. Now, the good news is there is an antidote to downgliding, but it's a lot more involved than just upgliding. It's a lot more involved than just going up in pitch or going up in energy. To combat downglides, what an actor needs to do is, first of all, know what they're saying. Second of all, know why they're saying it. And third, know what they're doing, right? So for an actor to discover these three things, what am I saying, why am I saying it, and what am I doing, there are some steps that we can take. And I want to acknowledge before I get into the specifics of these points, these steps, that I didn't come up with any of them. All of them can really be traced back to a man named Konstantin Stanislavski, who was a Russian acting teacher known as the father of modern drama. But I also want to acknowledge one of my colleagues, Leslie Brott, who is the head of our actor training program, who has invited me to sit in on some of her classes, has allowed me to sit in on some of her classes, and has helped me to craft the order of these steps and to put them in focus. So we'll talk about those seven steps now. And the first sounds like a real obvious thing. Read the play. Sounds like a pretty good place to start. But you'd be surprised how many actors don't take advantage of this first step. You might say, how is that possible? How are they going to memorize all their lines? Well, what happens with a lot of particularly young actors, though it happens with older actors as well, is they get that script, they open it up, and what do? They immediately go to the pages that their character is on, or they have a highlighter, and they immediately go and start highlighting their lines, or even worse, counting their lines. They don't even read the lines, they just want to count how many lines they have on a page, right? I used to do that as a young actor myself, right? It was so exciting to get cast in these shows. But the danger with that is you don't get the advantage of reading the entire story of the play. And sometimes other characters, maybe in pages that you're not even on, especially in pages that you're not even on, are going to reveal information about you that is imperative to you understanding the character of your character, right? So reading a play in its entirety is important for us to get a good overall sense of the story that we're going to be telling. But it's important for another reason. The first read-through of a play, if you think about it, is really the first and last opportunity that an actor has to experience a play in the same way that an audience will experience the play. Because think about it, we're going to go through 7 steps here, and each of these steps is going to make us more and more of an expert on this play, right? So by the time we get to opening night, we know this play backwards and forwards, theoretically. And we perform this play, we're an expert, but what we forget is that there are audience members who don't know anything about the play. They're going to be surprised by these things, right? And we should have a pretty good sense. We should remember what it was like that first time we read the play. We're going to make assumptions about characters. We're going to make assumptions about how this story is going to unfold, how the plot will pan out. And those are all important things for us to remember, because we should be doing something to theatricalize that and enforce these things that a playwright probably intended to be surprises or things that, or misdirection. We should theatricalize that. And this is the last opportunity that we'll have that, this first read-through of the play. You might think, well, how is that true for plays like Romeo and Juliet? Everybody knows that story. So is it the same thing? There are no surprises in that. There are when you think about how few people are actually going to be very familiar with the actual text, right? We're going to be speaking in language in a language that is English, but people don't recognize it as the English that we speak today, right? As an example from a play, Midsummer Night's Dream. I played a character in that play once, and I had this line I had to come out and say, "By'r Laken, a parlous fear." Right? Does anybody know what that means? By'r Laken, a parlous fear. I didn't know what it meant. Even after I looked it up, I thought, I don't care how much I know this, nobody is going to understand it, no matter how much I understand in my head what those words mean. And I had a great director who said, when you come out on stage, raise your hand and say it as loud as you can. And I thought, okay. So I came out on stage and I said it really loud. And he said, no, I want you to literally raise your hand and say that line as loud as you can. And so I came out on stage and I raised my hand and I said it really, really loud. And he said, great, I get it. Because what the line actually means is, holy crap, I'm really scared, right? And so there's no way that they're going to understand that text. Some people will. Some English majors out there might understand what it means. But everybody else, when I raise my hand and say it as loud as I can, will go, oh, that guy's scared, right? So it's part of that communication. And we lose some of those clues if we don't take advantage of this first read-through of the play. And I always encourage my actors, as they're reading the play, to have a notepad with them or their phone, which inevitably they will, and take notes. What are the things that surprise you? What are the assumptions that you make? So you'll be able to come back to this once you're already an expert on the play, right? Okay, so step number 2 is research. We read the play for fun. We read the play for that sense of what it must be like to be surprised by this play. And then we have to start becoming an expert on this play. The first parts of the research process are all the stuff that you would find very obvious, right? If I don't know what a word means, I have to look it up. If I don't understand a reference to pop culture or history, I have to look those things up, right? It's a lot easier now than it used to be. You just have your phone with you and you look it up in Google, you make your little notes on the side of your script, and now you know that, right? But research has another level as well for an actor, because once you know literally what you're saying, you also have to start to understand why you're saying it. And part of that is understanding character. Where have I come from? Where am I now, and where am I expecting to go? What are the things that other people say about me in the world of this play? When was this play written, and what can I find out about the playwright themselves, right? We're getting ready to do The Crucible this year over in the Department of Theater Arts. It's very important to know when that play was written, right? To know what Arthur Miller was going through, to know that he was listening to Elia Kazan name names in the House Un-American trial that was going on. And if you know that context and know the play, then that informs what these characters are feeling and going through, right? So all of that research is going to help us to start answer that question of, why am I saying it, right? The reading of the play answers the what we're saying. The research of the play enforces the what we're saying, because we define those things. And then the research starts to answer that second question, why am I saying that, right? The next step is to identify something called super objective. Now, this is a part of the process that most of our students initially skip. It seems like a pretty easy thing to do, right? What is my super objective? A super objective is what I want more than anything else from the beginning of this play to the end of the play, right? And actors initially will think, well, that's pretty easy. I want respect, or I want this, something that feels like it's informative and specific. But if you really dig in to the play, you find that actually that might not be what I want overall, right? And this is important because what we do in small moments of the play should never take us away from what we want most. So it's going to guide the rest of the work. It's going to guide the rest of the steps for us to identify what the super objective is. And I want to illustrate why it's a little bit tricky. So if this is the play, can you see that? Should I use a different color? Black. Okay, so if this is the whole play, a play is divided usually into acts, right? And those acts are divided into scenes. And these scenes are divided into smaller beats, right? So we'll come back to this in a second. But if what we're after is a super objective that applies from the beginning of this play to the end of the play, let's take a play like Hamlet. And let's take a character like Hamlet, right? What does Hamlet want? He wants revenge, right? His dad says, your uncle murdered me and you need to get revenge, right? So he wants revenge. That's true, but if you think about it, it doesn't apply to the whole play. Why? Because Hamlet doesn't find out that his uncle murdered his father until Act 1, Scene 4. So that doesn't apply to this part of the play, right? Also, Hamlet succeeds. He kills Claudius. And then what happens? He talks for 30 minutes, right? So he's been poisoned, but he's still got a lot to say, right? So he's talking to Horatio over here, and he's already got his revenge. So revenge only applies for this. And remember, super objective is not about finding the objective that works for most of the play. It's finding the objective that works for the entire play. Now, Hamlet is a unique exception, right? Why? Because he dies here, and then there's a little bit more of the play to go. So you don't have to say the whole play, because what is his super objective once he's already dead, right? You can say the entirety of the play that this character lives in, right? So that's just a technicality. So super objective for Hamlet has to be something bigger than revenge. Revenge needs to be a part of it. Why? Because we know that for a large portion of the play, Hamlet does want revenge. But what does he want even more than that? If we dig a little bit deeper into the play, we know that from the very beginning of the play, he's sitting moping in this room and he's saying, I want to go back to Wittenberg. I want to go back to school. Later in the play, after he's dead, Horatio tries to kill himself. And Hamlet says, no, you can't. You have to remain and you have to tell my story. You have to tell everybody what happened here. So if we dig in deep, we realize that what Hamlet really wants is to set things right with the world. From the very beginning of the play, his dad has been killed. He wasn't there when it happened. He was a long ways away. He comes back, his dad's already buried, and his mother is now married to his uncle, right? He is feeling a loss of equilibrium. He is feeling like he needs closure. He wants things to be set right with the world. And if we think of that, then revenge could be part of that, right? Getting Horatio to tell my story can be part of that, right? Going back to school can be part of that. And all of those smaller objectives fit into that greater super objective, right? So that's the advantage of super objective. We dig a little bit deeper, and it will help us to define the objectives that are to come, all right? So there's a little bit about super objective. Sorry, I got to move quickly through it. The next step is beats. Now, we talked about that a little bit already with my expert drawing that I put up here, right? So we've got the play. That play is separated into acts, usually, and an act is usually separated into scenes. Those are all marked for us. We don't have to go digging for that. But there are smaller moments or sections. Stanislavski referred to them as beats. Actually, apparently the anecdote is he was actually saying the word bit, but it sounded like beat because of his Russian accent, so we say beats. Anyway, we do have to search for those, right? So the way I like to look at it is the play is equal to a book. The act is equal to a part of a book. You know, sometimes a book is split into part 1, part 2, part 3. A scene is a chapter in a play, and the beat is like a new paragraph, right? And if we read a book that had no paragraph breaks, it would be excruciating, right? Try reading Harry Potter with no paragraph or chapter breaks, and it would be really much less enjoyable. Same thing with a play. If we don't pay attention to these changes in beats, then it's going to be hard to listen to. So part of our communication is understanding when we shift from one beat to the next. Now, how do we identify these beat changes? You can enroll in the BFA Actor Training Program, and we're still talking about it in their 4th year of training. So, I mean, it's a long discussion about how to really effectively find beat changes in a play. But there's 3 ways to look at it quickly. One is it's a rehearsable chunk. 2, it's when our actions succeed, fail, or we're presented with new information. Or the 3rd way to look at it is it's a specific topic is talked about in this chunk, and then we move on to another topic, all right? So the next step, we read the play, we research the play, we identify our super objective, and then for the portions of the play that we're in, or if you're directing the play, for the entire play, you separate the play into beats, or you separate your scene into beats, right? And now for each one of those beats, we're ready to move on to the rest of the work. For each beat that we are in, we identify our objective. And then for each beat, we identify our obstacle. And then for each of those beats, we identify our action. So an objective is, what do I want, right? So let's take Hamlet at the beginning of the play. We know he wants revenge later, but at the beginning of the play, he doesn't know yet that he needs to get revenge. So what does he want? I want to go back to school. And we have to identify the obstacle. In that beat, at the beginning, what is standing in my way? What is standing in the way of me getting what I want? What's stopping me from achieving my objective? In Hamlet's case, his uncle says it is retrograde to our desire for you to go back to Wittenberg. And his mom is sitting next to him saying, come on, Hamlet, don't go back, right? So the powers that be don't want him to leave. Also, if you read a little bit deeper, I think there's another reason why Hamlet wants to say his girlfriend, Ophelia, is sitting on the other side of the table from Polonius saying, please don't go, right? So he's got some obstacles. I want to go back to school. Why? Because that will set things right with the world. What's standing in my way? Claudius, Gertrude, and Ophelia. So what is my action? The action is what I do to overcome my obstacle and achieve my objective, right? So an action is a single verb, an action verb that I can put my shoulder behind, I can really do. I had an acting teacher once that said, if you can sit in a chair and do it, it's an action, right? So can you sit in a chair and sad? No. Can you sit in a chair and angry? No. You can be sad, you can be angry, but our goal is never to do emotions or do states of being. Emotion comes as a byproduct of circumstance. So the way we achieve that emotion is by doing something and either succeeding or failing, right? So that's why we're called actors, because we're trying to find these actions. We should always know what we're doing, right? So I want to go back to school. I have an obstacle. My uncle and my mom and my girlfriend don't want me to go. So what am I doing? I'm moping. That's how Hamlet starts the play, right? This assigning of actions is what makes an actor an individual actor, right? Because the script is not going to change from actor to actor. The way that an actor chooses to play things is what's going to change from actor to actor. That's why we can see Hamlet 100 times and it'll be different 100 times. Not just because of the concept, but because of actions that are assigned. Obviously, not every actor works this way, but most actors who have studied theater in the United States since 1930 do some version of this process, right? So it's about assigning effective action verbs that are going to unlock for us the answer to that final question, what am I doing, right? So steps 1 and 2 help define what am I saying. Steps 3 through 6 helps define why am I saying it. And then this last one helps define what am I doing. And if we don't know what we're doing, it's not going to mean much, right? Because after this, there's a whole slew of things that we can do as actors, right? We train our bodies, we train our voices, we train our articulators. I watched one of these that Adrian Moore did, talking about a lot of things to do with articulation and diction. That's all important for an actor to be able to effectively communicate. But if we haven't done this, if we don't know what we're saying, why we're saying it, and what we're doing, it doesn't matter how articulate we are, what we're saying is going to be hollow, right? Because it has to be filled with this life, right? This is what makes an actor, this is what makes a character seem like a living, breathing human being, right? To fill our characters with this. The next thing that we would talk about as actors, if you wanted to call it an 8th step, would be operative words. We break down our text and we determine, okay, in this sentence, what am I really doing? The reason we do that is because now that we're armed with an action, we know what we're doing, but we have to have a mechanism to do it with. And the text is that vehicle for action, right? So we start to connect all of this to voice, to speech, to physicality on stage. But this is where we start, right? Now, how can you use this as you ask yourself this question, communicating science? I'm not exactly sure what the parallels are for reading the play, researching the play. I think there's some obvious ones there for research. But this idea that if you're going to teach me about something that I don't know, if you're just going to give me information, then you're never going to get past this part of the process, right? understanding why you want to convince me of these things or educate me about these things is important, and I think applies to objective and obstacle. Certainly, I can be the obstacle or the person you're talking to, but asking yourself that final question: what am I doing with what I'm communicating? I think is certainly an important piece of the puzzle for an actor, and I think probably has some applications to communicating science as well. Thank you very much. So what do we do now?
Any questions or comments, or just open it up for discussion if anybody has?
Any questions? Yes.
When you see science communication talks, what do you think are some of the biggest kind of pitfalls that you see science communicators fall into?
You know, just one of the reasons why I was nervous to have Rob here. He did a great TED Talk, he and Rob Gillies. And one of the things that they acknowledged right off the bat in their talk was that you have all this information, right? And if you just try to get it all out there, that can be a problem, right? I mean, you can have a great desire to do this, but if they don't have a desire to listen, or if they don't even have common ground with you, none of that's going to get into their heads, right? So I think one of the pitfalls that I see is people starting to teach before the learner is ready to learn, or before the listener is ready to even take any of that in. Is that making sense, Rob? Did I butcher your the intent of your message?
No, well, that was so long ago, I don't remember. But that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of prepare the ground, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about action.
Mm-hmm.
So in a script, you're trying to reinforce who you are and what you're doing with actions.
Right.
So how about, what would you say to someone talking about science, about how we would think about our nonverbal communication, or the way that we use our bodies or don't use our bodies at all when we're speaking?
I'm going to try and answer the question this way. I hope it addresses what you actually asked. We talk about something a lot in acting. We talk about making positive choices. The positive choices always have a greater effect than negative choices. The positive doesn't necessarily mean happy, right? For instance, it's not a positive thing for me to yell at my child, but under certain circumstances, that might become a positive choice. If we're playing basketball out in the driveway and the ball rolls out into the street and my daughter doesn't see a car coming and is going after that ball, in that case, it is a positive choice for me to say, stop, right? Because that is the fastest, most effective way for me to get what I want, her to stop and not put herself into harm's way, right? Now, there are all sorts of approaches to this from an acting perspective, right? I do these things first, and then my physicality follows. That's an inside-out approach to acting. So I guess the way that I'm trying to answer that question is, I feel like we don't have to think about it too much. In fact, my personal belief is that it can be detrimental if I'm thinking, okay, in this speech, at this point, I'm going to do this with my hand, and I'm going to do this with my arm, and I'm going to, pound on the podium at this point. It can seem hollow, right? But if I had answered for myself what my intention is, or all of this adds up to motivation, if I know what my motivation is, then physicality and use of my vocal instrument, I think, will follow, right, in a natural, effective way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because there is another school of acting, right? The Michael Chekhov School of Acting. Michael Chekhov was one of Stanislavski's prize pupils. Until one day he stood up in class after like 3 years of working with him and said, I'm really good at doing this, but I have to let you know I don't believe anything that you've ever taught me, so I'm going to go start my own school. And that kind of put Stanislavski into a downward spiral when he came back. But Michael Chekhov's approach is the opposite. It's outside in. So his approach is very much, I will pound the podium with my fist and I will do this. And if I create the physical life, then the internal will follow, right? It's just a different way of looking at it. Any other questions? All right, thanks so much for, oh, go ahead.
I just sort of, so in about 20 minutes, I'm going to go teach a class to the fine arts students.
Oh, yeah.
And then
It's like the most wildly popular class in the history of the Kane College of the Arts.
Everybody gets an A, that's why. It's not quite true. But then an hour after that, I'm going to go across campus and teach an introductory physics course to 300 engineers.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to and it occurs to me, there's I do all kinds of things wrong in that, more so than the other one. But just teaching the physics and what was the downsliding?
Downglide.
Downgliding.
Yeah.
And rushing through, because for me, this is quite basic information. And I'm just not pretending like that first thing you said, like they don't know any of this.
Yeah.
And some of this is going to surprise them. And if I just blast right through it, of course, they don't even have time to be surprised. They don't have time to be, I'm finding this really, because of course, it seems to me like our lectures are performances.
Yeah.
And we don't always treat them that way, but if we did.
Well, another thing you could consider, and this is something we consider in our work as actors, is it sounds to me like what you've just described is you're going to talk to a bunch of artists about things that you anticipate they will need more instruction in. You're going to have to break it down for them. So what you've essentially done is you've activated your obstacle. You've created for yourself an obstacle in them that is probably true, right? But because that exists, you're having to work harder to play your action, right? But when you go talk to scientists about science, that obstacle has not been activated for you, right? Because you say this comes as second nature to you, and the assumption may be that it also comes as second nature to them. So because you have less of an obstacle to overcome, your action isn't as strong, right? So and it happens to actors all the time, right? We'll say, this moment is really weak. This is really tepid. What are you doing? And they'll say, well, I'm flirting. Really? Because it didn't look like you were flirting. And so we'll say, why don't you activate your obstacle? And so when you start to play that, so the action may be completely right, but if they're not doing anything with it, it's not effective. So sometimes the key is to activate that obstacle. So maybe a beneficial thing is to go over there and imagine that this group of scientists is a group of artists, and you have to communicate to them in a way that's going to pull more out of you in the playing of it, right? I mean, for me, for actors, I'm thinking in the playing of it. For you, it's in the teaching of it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The principle of activating obstacles.
That notion of activating obstacles,
Yeah.
I think is helpful for me.
It's something that we use all the time, particularly in like film and television work, because results are expected so much faster, right? We get so used to it in the theater that like we have this idea of a way we're going to take something, and we all go home and think about it and then come back and we rehearse for 4 more weeks, right? But in film and television, that entire process is truncated into, you have your first read through, 6 weeks of rehearsal, opening night, and closing night every time you shoot a scene, right? Because you do that, it's in the can, you move on to the next thing. So when you're in those situations, you have to find fast ways to get results. Activating an obstacle is one of those ways, because if you're in a scene and it's just nothing's really happening, you can say, all right, what is another obstacle I could add to this? So you could use what's inherent in the script, or the great thing for an actor is you can craft anything you want. And as teachers, I think it's really the same way. We can imagine anything we want about the audience that we're talking to. And if we can believe in that obstacle, activate that obstacle, it's going to require more of us. Thanks.
Well, I have more. The notion of the super objective too, I think, is really useful for, as I'm thinking of science communication.
Yeah.
Well, to anybody, but usually it's the public. And switching it from I'm trying to give them this information to what do I want to happen as a result?
Right. Yeah, because I want to give them information. That's this. That's today. that's in the next hour, right? But why? So that they can then go out and change the world, so that, whatever that is going to inform and maybe help us to get more specific about what we want in this moment, right?
I mean, I feel like this is when I see what I think of as really bad science talks, it's often that the speaker isn't really thinking about what's the objective for this audience.
Yeah.
So usually, even if it's like a physics colloquium, it should be for a general physics audience, not for someone in that discipline. And so I'm not going to try to take what this person is telling me and go build on it.
Mm.
I just kind of want to understand where it fits in a bigger picture. But often I'm taught it in a way it's presented to me in a way that, okay, now go figure out what this term is in this equation, and then we can move forward. And it's easy to do that, I think, for a public audience too.
Sure.
Again, the subjective is, no, I don't want you to go build on this. I don't want you to go do more science. I want you to do something with, and whatever that is from my perspective. This is just laying it out like this. I feel like I need to just kind of go through this list every time before I go give it.
Yeah.
Got 25 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, this is, people first of all, people are surprised that we teach anything in the actor training program. But then they're surprised that this is really it. There's a lot of specialty classes, voice classes, speech classes, movement classes that go into enhancing your physical and vocal instrument. But as far as what we do as actors, this is it. And we have actors in their fourth year that are still like coming in, and we'll say, but what are you doing? And they'll say, I'm doing this. And we'll say, really? And then we would go back to the text and they go, I just haven't found the right action. There's all sorts of reasons why actions don't work. Sometimes they're just the wrong action. Sometimes it's because we haven't activated our obstacle. Sometimes it's when we did this work, because this is all what we call scoring that we do before we even get to the first rehearsal. Sometimes we just didn't have all the information yet. And so late in the rehearsal process, we're still playing this action that we decided on 3 weeks ago. But now we understand these characters so much more. More importantly, what we understand is what the characters we're playing with are doing now, right? Because we're diving into the heads of the characters we're playing, but we don't necessarily put as much effort into understanding what the other characters are doing or saying, right? So 3 weeks into rehearsal, we understand that a lot better, and we always encourage the actors to go back to the script and see if there's things that you need to tweak now, because we have more information. And at first, actors are so resistant to that because it seems like a recognition that they were wrong the first time, that they failed in this work that they did. And we have to communicate to them that it wasn't a failure, it's what got you to this point. You wouldn't be to this level of understanding if you hadn't done all this. And yes, in some cases, gotten the answers wrong, but it's what gets you to go forward, right? But especially in an education setting, actors look at that as like, oh, I did all this busy work for naught, and now I have to go do the assignment again, right? We have to get them out of that mindset. It's not an assignment. These are the tools that are going to help unlock meaning for you on stage. Yes.
This question of unlocking meaning, I think, is really worth thinking a little more, because it seems like the environment that a lot of science communication, especially the interface with politics, is right now, is in this situation of really compressed meaning within social media context and that sort of thing. I'm thinking about kind of the importance that has been put on kind of gestures that become mimetic, whether it's like tearing up the State of the Union or on the floor of the Congress. That's what gets circulated. And,
right.
And that's actually like your little capsule in which meaning is transmitted. And I wonder to the degree in which kind of theater can help us think through kind of this our meme war strategy and kind of like how we create gestures or communications that are really compressed but mimetic and able to communicate a lot within kind of a tight package.
Obviously, I don't know the ultimate answer to that question. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi, that was premeditated. But it made a strong statement. Whether you're for it or against it, it made a strong statement, and it's circulating around on Facebook and stuff. So I think that's a very good point. From an actor's perspective, I think the way those things happen is when you know who you are, all of the same things. You know what you're saying, you know why you're saying it, you know what you're doing, and then you listen and respond with a point of view. That's where the famous acting teacher named Uta Hagen says that every performance should be a very, 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 very tightly controlled improvisation. Another acting teacher, Sanford Meisner, says that you plan and you plan and you plan. You prepare and you prepare and you prepare. You rehearse and you rehearse and you rehearse, and then you pray that something goes wrong. Because when you're on stage and something goes wrong, when you are prepared, you live through that. Real life happens on stage because it has to. Not because you've rehearsed it, but because something is happening in front of you that you have to deal with, right? And in those moments are when we have the most meaningful, I don't know, maybe that's exactly what happened during the State of the Union. Maybe that came from this desire to do this, right? And maybe that's why it's so meaningful. Heath Ledger has an example of that in the second Batman movie that Christopher Nolan directed, right? There's this beautiful moment when Commissioner Gordon gets a promotion and the Joker is sitting in a jail cell and everybody cheers for Commissioner Gordon, and he has this haunting applause that he does, right? And it's this really intense moment of the movie that wasn't rehearsed, that wasn't scripted, that was an actor listening and responding with a point of view, right? And so I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe as speakers, being open to the energy in the room with us and recognizing that we have this plan, but if a student brings something up or if this other thing comes up, then maybe the answer is to stop the plan and respond to that. There's no right or wrong answer. Listening and responding with a point of view may be more meaningful than the rehearsed chunk of text we had that we were planning to follow this thought. Yes.
I think in terms of this play analogy with what we do in our program, we do team science and we have to do these team presentations. Seeing the parallel there, it's the importance of practicing with our team. So I know what Betsy is going to say, and Betsy knows what I'm going to say, and so we and so I can, again, I'm not going to memorize my part of the presentation, but I can flow because I know what my teammates are going to say, what they're thinking, and I can link to what they're saying as I'm talking.
Yeah.
Another point there. And also, as a team, we need to understand our super objective or our major takeaway of the presentation.
Obviously it works in a play, right? Because we know how it's going to end, right? All of these, it makes it sound so mysterious that we're trying to come up with these. Well, ultimately, the script tells us exactly where we're going. There's an acting book called Backwards and Forwards. We know what to do on page 10 because we know what happens on page 80. And we know we have to establish that trajectory to get us there. We can't just behave this way and then in the last 10 pages of the script go here, right? So we know that there's places we have to travel all along the way. And if you as a team know the end result or what the hope of the end result is, then that hopefully will help. Yes, and then go ahead.
I was doing a pretty good job of translating this into steps as I was writing this down. I wasn't taking notes about what you were doing. I was trying to translate it into science communication.
Oh, that's great.
And the challenge that I came up with was at step 7, in the action. And because as a science communicator, often it really depends on where we are. Mm-hmm. So I might be able to take students into a lab. I might be able to take professionals out into the field and have them, with me, and we'll actually look at a sagebrush or whatever it is that I'm trying to do. But other times, I'm doing a webinar sitting in, and there's 500 people across the country, or the world, in fact, and I'm sitting in a room with a PowerPoint, that's about as much as I can get. And so my action may be the PowerPoint. So I was trying to think about how that would fit with what you guys do, and I was thinking, sometimes you've got a script and you've got a set. Mm-hmm. So Hamlet picks up Yorick's skull. Mm-hmm. And that action helps to really, make a big deal in that scene. Other times, we're just on stage, and there are situations where we actually have plays that are setless,
Sure.
Or improv situations where there's nothing really you can improv with. Do you teach people differently about how to operate in those propless settings that might help us with thinking about our propless settings?
Well, I don't know that we teach people differently, but one of the things that occurred to me while you were talking is something that Rob had already mentioned, this idea that we think of maybe we should think of our lectures as performances, right? Because if what you've just described is this moment with in New York, we have this very specific thing to do. I can't do that when I'm just in front of the camera, but what I could do is put on that camera this sense of a very specific person I'm teaching, as opposed to just this faceless, nameless audience, attaching some sort of specificity and, again, meaning to the person I'm communicating with, and ultimately theatricalize it in some way, right? Maybe that's, I don't know, part of the message that I'm sharing is, like, as actors, it's not enough. That's ultimately what I'm saying. It's not enough just to know what we're saying and why we're saying it. We also have to take the next step and say, what am I doing? And as an actor, if you're not theatricalizing what you're doing, then the audience isn't going to get it. So I don't know that we teach anything different about those moments when we don't have a set or we don't have props, other than the importance of all of these things actually being even more so in those moments when all you have is a couch and you're sitting down and listening, or, you know, having a simple conversation, right? I mean, we like to say that in the theater, there's no such thing as a simple conversation. Like, we don't write plays about the day that nothing happened to a normal person, right? We do plays about the day that, you know, the chemical fertilizer hits the ventilation system to a very interesting person, right? Now, I don't know how usable that is, because sometimes you're just teaching this thing that is seemingly very boring, but maybe the onus is on us as instructors, whether we're teaching about acting or science or engineering or, you know, fill in the blank, to come up with our own version of what theatricalizing this means, right? I certainly notice that in myself sometimes as a teacher. You know, I teach lecture classes that are, you know, outside of acting, just understanding theater. And I notice on the days when I think, okay, I don't necessarily think in terms of how am I going to theatricalize this, but when I take the time to think, there's somebody out there who doesn't know this yet, particularly like when we get to recruitment periods, and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's anybody in that class that I could convert to the dark side and get them to join the theater program. You know, if I go into a lecture that way, it has more meaning to me, and so therefore probably has more meaning to the person that I'm talking to. And then you had
Yeah, well, my question has evolved enormously over the last several, so I'm not sure I can even ask it anymore. So that there's a whole lot in that obstacle stuff, which is a word I hadn't heard before, but I think it's what we do when we prepare for our talks, when we sort of think through all the questions we'll get, all the ways people might not want to hear what we want to say, what they might know.
Or in this generation, what are they going to look up on their phones while I'm communicating to them? You know, I first of all, I better know my stuff. Second, if I have an opinion about something that I know somebody has a differing opinion of, I got to be able to back that up. Because I know some student in the back is going to be Googling everything I say.
So a lot of the times, this sort of is what Mark was talking about. I think the hardest science communication is when it's verbal, so you're doing it once, it's a performance, and you can't get audience feedback, sort of this webinar thing. And if you've done all your homework and you know what you want to do and why, and you've worried yourself sick about every way things could go wrong, you can do it. You can pull off a good talk, and because you can see the people in your audience, and you know whether they're with you or not, and you know when you have to do something differently. It just kind of happens. But when you're on stage, what do you do about that? Do you just go with the chemistry of the other actors on the stage with you? You can't see people, right? Because we're all out there in the dark.
Yeah, and then even the lights keep you from doing that. I think the better comparison is when we're doing auditions, because generally speaking, our focus is primarily on the other characters that we're on stage with. But what I'm thinking of when you say, you know, speaking into the void of the webinar camera, that feels very much like what we experience when we go to auditions, because suddenly we're doing a monologue, which is really dialogue that we've stripped the other person's responses away from. And so we're delivering this thing, and we create an other out here. That's what we call them, the other. And we place the other on a physical location on the wall opposite us, on the other side of the people that are watching us audition. And in that situation, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, I'm not getting anything from them. Similar to how you're saying, like when you speak in a webinar, you don't get the gratification of, wait, I don't understand this, or yes, I understand what you're saying, right? But that's the beauty of being an actor, is you get to craft whatever response you want. So maybe that's something that would be useful to you. Similar to what we've already been talking about, you craft for yourself, who is this person that I'm talking to? And you can craft for yourself, no, they don't get it, in which case I have to lean into the instruction, or they do get it and I can move on to something else. Now, you may not always be right about the timing of them getting it or not getting it, but it might help you in the playing of it, right?
So you imagine them. And
Yeah,
if you're lucky,
when I say craft, that's exactly what I mean. We imagine, and I mean, like, imagine that there's somebody standing right there, agreeing with me, disagreeing with me, looking puzzled, laughing at my jokes, whatever the case may be. I can imagine that my audience is responding any way I want them to, right? So for actors, the usefulness of that in an audition is, if I want to show different aspects of myself, I can create a different reaction that I'm reacting to. Now, the audience doesn't see what I'm pretending to see. Obviously, they don't, because I'm not either. I'm just imagining it. But I think we could do that the same way. Just a different way of looking at it. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about trust and the importance of trust in performances, and like with your scene partners, and trust building, especially like when again, like in the team science presentation kind of environment. If I don't trust my teammates, then in the question portion, I might take over all of the answers, and I'm not going to let my teammates answer because I don't trust that they actually know the answer, and then it becomes the show about me kind of thing. Or I remember being on stage in high school, and like, if I don't trust my scene partner, I'm going to be like, oh, they're going to forget their line, and then I'm going to forget my line.
Right.
And so, whereas if I trust them and they forget their line, then I can fill in and accommodate. So I'm just kind of wondering about on stage the importance of trust and how you build trust.
That's a very good point, right? And what we like to say is that we train our actors to be, first of all, director-proof, but then second of all, actor-proof, because you don't get to control that environment. You know, sometimes you're working with fantastic directors that work in very positive ways. Sometimes, unfortunately, you're working with directors that their behavior borders on abusive, right? Or just less natural and organic. Same thing with actors, right? You don't get to decide that I will only work with actors that work this way, right? You may, unfortunately, sometimes be working with an actor who's like a block of wood, but you have to be in love with them, right? And the answer is similar to what we already talked about. You have to craft or imagine the reasons why you feel all of these things towards this person, right? So, I mean, there's a whole lot of advice for that in Uta Hagen's book, Respect for Acting. She uses principles like particularization, right? So I may be working with an actress that I can't stand, right? But maybe she has lovely hair, and I can just focus on that, right? Beautiful hair, right? Yeah. You know, so particularization. Substitution is another principle that she talks about. Maybe I can't find anything I like about that, but I can imagine if my wife were standing in her place, right? Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So you kind of said that you need to trust yourself enough that trusting the people that you're working with isn't an issue.
Right.
Because you know you can pull it off. You know
Right.
Yeah. Is that what?
And the only way to do that is to make sure you've done the work. I don't trust myself if I've been lazy, right? In which case, that should make it easy for me to trust other people, because they're not going to do anything worse than I'm doing, just faking it. But yeah, if I've done my homework and I'm showing up and I'm present and engaged, then yeah, I should. If I've studied and I've done all that stuff, I should trust myself that whatever the situation is, I'll be able to respond truthfully. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you so much. This was fun. I was really dreading this.
Well, thank you. It was enormously helpful and informative. I wish you would come back again.
Well, I can't promise that.
I'll email you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody, please take some food.
I'll go into the Watts seminar with like suspicions on zero person.
We got a big afternoon tomorrow.
We do. Tomorrow we said.
It's,
Well, we just got that one meeting.
Yeah, we have a candidate.
Oh, we do have a lab
interviewing for the
So we've got CAS in the studio, and then we've got the lab meeting, and then we have that other.
This one.
So yeah, we're just stuck with each other for a while.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Maybe I'm
Okay.
We don't want to repeat too much.
From what I heard, that wasn't planned, but tearing up.
Oh, hey, what's this? Get some hungry.
oh, no, it's cool.
But actually.
Well, actually, it's coffee.
And it's
Is this all that?
This was a science communication presentation from someone in the
Yeah. But then there is like a fine line between like it's too nervous versus like you want to improv, but if you get nervous, if you're not prepared,
several of the things.
Yeah. In my experience, some people.
You have to be like ready to let stuff go wrong.
Yes, and like if you feel good about stuff, then if stuff goes wrong, then like you say, you can really good, but if you don't feel good about it, and stuff goes wrong, it's like.
Yep.
Even some words.
Yep. It happened to me in high school. I was giving a presentation at an ocean science school conference, and I misnumbered my note card.
Oh no.
I had 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm up there. I thought I had lost a card.
Yeah. Right there.
No, it turns out I just
Karen Zachariah.
skipped like writing. So I'm up there and I'm like, oh my God, there's no card 3, there's no card 3, and I literally say crap into the microphone. And I didn't even realize it until I went sat down, and my coach was like, Christina, good job, but maybe don't say crap into the microphone. I did what? But I had that panic moment where I was like, if I had like known my stuff, I would have been like, oh, I just misnumbered this card, you know?
I remember, I rehearsed like crazy because I was presenting my thesis research at the International Coral Symposium. In front of like people whose like work I was citing.
Right.
Like heroes.
Yeah.
And I rehearsed like a 15-minute talk, and I was having a hard time keeping it under like 17.
No.
I get up there and I'm done 12. I went through it so fast. Because you don't realize how slow time goes, how quickly you speak when you're like the pressure's on, you're like,
Fantastic.
It was I finished and everybody was
Get my hands on it. Yeah, because we are all.
Because everybody did it before me, you know, like the light starts to flash, and
Right.
you got like 30 seconds.
Well,
So we're looking for
And this is the
good
problem.
bullshit.
It's not only about.
And I delivered, I said everything I needed to say, all the information was there, it was just like, I was so nervous. That was the first time I ever presented it kind of confidence,
Right.
you know?
Thank you.
Take a plate, grab whatever, yeah. I want to feed my kids.
Some in a
stuff.
box and mail them to your parents.
Yeah.
I'm gonna roll into the walk seminar late with like this entire plate of food and look really silly.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, how am I going to sneak in with all this food?
Yeah, put another plate over the top so it doesn't look like,
Oh, that's a good idea.
it looks like a frisbee instead of a plate of food. Right?
Well, they all know that I was doing this right up until this, so they should
Oh,
forgive me. Hey, thanks again.
Dude, seriously, that was outstanding. I really, really enjoyed that. So we'll definitely have you back. And you can give the exact same talk again, like,
Oh, geez.
2 semesters from now. Because it'll be a new group of people, you
Yeah.
know. Or, you know, just keep us in mind, and I'll reach out to you in, you know, like a semester or 2 and just be like, hey, you got anything you want to come talk about?
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Thanks again. That was really great.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Your meeting has ended.